In this video, I'm building a machine.
You can use machines with memory data.
Specifically, my home rig. It was shot in March 2021. We'll talk about why I chose the parts I did and some general tips and strategies I use when I'm building. This video is part tutorial, part demo, and just part chill. Use the chapters if you want to see certain parts being unboxed. The MSI MEG Z590 Ace. When I build a machine or when I build for others, I often get the best available chipset simply because it lasts the longest. It has the most features that you may or may not be using at the time, but often it's more future-proof than some of the other chipsets. So for Intel, Z590 was the best available. I think the Ace has everything that the Godlike does, and it's at a much more reasonable price point. It's more than any person would need in their system if you didn't want to brag about it. Maybe that's part of why I picked it. I talked myself into the idea that the power rails would help with overclocking Intel chips. The ones on the Ace are particularly robust. They can deliver a lot of power, especially when you're overclocking. I think in the end, my decision was ultimately based on my philosophy when putting together a machine. The philosophy driving a lot of my part selection has to do with the idea that I like what I call a 10-year build. I don't really like to replace the main board very often. I don't really like to replace the CPU very often. I only make marginal increases when needed, maybe a graphics card, a hard drive, things like that. My experience is that AMD didn't really fit that bill. Both at work and at home, Intel has always been good. They remain solid long after their release date, and they punch above their weight down the road. I'm not sure, but I've had systems just age out with an AMD chipset. That's probably not everybody's experience, but that's why I went with Intel. The Samsung 980 Pro 1TB. Samsung drives are crazy fast, crazy reliable. I knew the Pro line was faster overall, and I thought it might make a difference for some applications installed to it. 1T is still good enough for a boot drive, in my opinion, especially with all the other storage in this build. Corsair Vengeance Pro 2x16GB at 3600 MHz. $32GB seems like a reasonable amount for running everything I needed, which was production applications, Chrome tabs, that I can fire up a game without worrying about hitting a limit, and virtualize. 3600 seemed like the sweet spot for price versus performance. Intel Core i9-10850K. Okay, hold it right there. You're probably asking yourself, why would you install a 10th gen Intel into a board that can take an 11th gen? So the 11th gen Intels had just come out and reviews were not kind. Prices were at an all-time high and the 10th gen had just gone on sale. The advantages of going with a 10th gen chip outweighed the negatives of the 11th gen chip. A lot of the drawbacks of the 11th gen were things I wanted to avoid. For example, heat generation, way too high, especially for the clock speed gains that you got compared to the 10th. Intel was pushing that design, that architecture way too far, and the performance gains were marginal, especially for the price, which I mentioned. The performance gains just didn't justify the price increase. Clock speed was negligible. I mean, really, when it comes down to it, you're not going to notice 1 or 2 tenths of a gigahertz. Core count, higher on the 10th gen, and for a more reasonable price. Again, you probably wouldn't see it in every day, but there might be some multi-threading gains there. The only real drawback to going with the 10th gen, in my opinion, was losing the PCIe 4.0 lanes. With a 10th gen chip, you lose the ability to tap into those lanes on this board. I can tell you, after having used it for a year, I don't miss them. My philosophy on PCIe lanes is that anything running with them isn't going to hit the theoretical maximum of that bus before it hits its own theoretical maximum of performance. You know, heat generation or just raw clock speed. Noctua NH-D15. I'm not picky about color, and Noctua is known for their tan and brown, but I found a black one. Now, why no water cooling? The philosophy here again is a 10-year build, and I've seen way too many water cooling hoses, rubber, and gaskets, and things just fail. I'm not interested in that. I don't want to have that happen. I don't want to plan for it. I don't want to have to check on it down the road. I just want it to work. If an air cooler ever starts to go flaky, you replace the fan. It keeps going. That simple. With the NH-D15, temps are just as good as water cooling without having to worry about it. It better be, because look how big this thing is. Here we're disassembling the old machine. I had a non-modular power supply. Good riddance. Never buy non-modular. Ugh. Case is a full-size NZXT case. Leaves a lot of room to build, and I wanted it in Ferrari red because it's obnoxious, loud, and looks great. Corsair AX 850. This is the top end of Corsair's power supplies, not in wattage, but in the 12-volt rail power delivery. I wanted to make sure the motherboard's power rails were being fed by a power supply that could actually give that and could scale up with the overclock. Never had a board with PCIe power connection. I imagine these are for the M2 slots. I didn't verify that in the manual. The first push of the power button right after you build is a nerve-wracking experience. Never know if things are going to actually start up or explode. First time in the BIOS, we verify the amount of RAM is showing up. We verify all of our drives are present. We verify the clock speed of the processor. Before we overclock it, we verify the presence of all of our hard drives, presence of the GPU, and we make sure our temps are not rising or being excessive, as that could indicate a problem. We run Ninite in Windows when we're confident that things are showing up and booting correctly. Ninite saves a bunch of time having to grab all those installers, and I never do a Windows build without it. I made a few changes since it was built, but overall I'm really happy with the way it turned out. With the parts I picked, this platform should be able to handle any workload for years to come.